first question is by Nilanthi Samara Naike. She's a strategic analyst at CNA Corporation in the US. And her question is, experts in New Delhi and Dhaka are currently optimistic about the Teesta Agreement being signed in 2016 due to the recent progress in India-Bangladesh relations, particularly with the land boundary accord. However, what do you think are the remaining obstacles, if any, to seeing the Teesta Agreement finalized?
Well, I too am optimistic that the Teesta Water Agreement might be signed before the end of 2016. I think there is goodwill on both sides, and the land boundary agreement has been a breakthrough, and it could be the basis for other agreements. I think the real problem is that there is just a shortage of water. We are having to share what is in fact a very scarce resource, and therefore both sides are concerned that will our people have enough water for their needs. But so long as we understand that we are facing this challenge of somehow equitably sharing what is a scarce resource, then we can come to a reasonable agreement in the interests of a larger peace, because there are many other ways in which the two Bengals can cooperate and collaborate, which will compensate for whatever little one might lose on that particular agreement.
The second question is from Mohan Balaji. He's a visiting fellow with Future Directions International in New Zealand. This is about Sri Lanka. How far do you agree with the statement that Sri Lankan stability is critical to New Delhi's Indian Ocean ambitions?
Well, the Indian Ocean space is of course quite vast. It stretches all the way from eastern and southern Africa, all the way, I would say, to the South China Sea, including practically all of Southeast Asia. But Sri Lanka is the country, the island, which is in some ways closest to us in this vast Indian Ocean space, and therefore stability in Sri Lanka is actually quite important to us. I think that Sri Lanka will have to sort out some of its domestic issues, that just a military victory over the Tamil Tigers a few years ago, and there was a lot of brutality towards the end of it, has not really resolved the matter of the legitimate rights of the Tamil minority there. So that's something that Sri Lanka will have to sort out. But also, I think from India's perspective, we can understand that as a sovereign country, Sri Lanka would want to have relations with China, among others. But I think even Sri Lanka understands that sometimes the terms on which China delivers infrastructure to various countries, whether it's Myanmar, in fact I was in Myanmar recently in August, or in Pakistan or in Sri Lanka, may be quite stringent, and therefore we must have good terms between neighbors in the larger context of the Indian Ocean interregional arena. What I'm saying is that people have been saying that the earlier government, the Rajapaksa government, had leaned a little too much towards China, and that sort of balance has somehow got restored with the new government, with Sirisena, but also the Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe. And I think that Sri Lanka has to work out, the right kind of balance that it needs with other Asian powers. And from India's perspective, Sri Lanka is important, stability there, but in the larger context of the Indian Ocean interregional arena, because in some ways, safe passage of ships and goods and trade through the Indian Ocean is in the interest of both India and China, the two major powers in Asia.
The next one is by Dr. Mohar Chakrabarti. She's at the South Calcutta Girls College in Kolkata. What have been the dynamics that prompted the West Bengal Chief Minister to change her stance vis-a-vis the issue of Tista water sharing with Bangladesh?
I think the dynamics were quite simple. She wanted consultation at the highest political level so that all her concerns were addressed. What had happened in 2011 was that certain bureaucrats were sent to her almost to inform her of what was going to happen in Dhaka rather than fully consult her as the leader of the state of West Bengal. This time we made sure that she was consulted at the highest political level, so she went along with the Prime Minister and the External Affairs Minister. And also there was the question of making sure that there was a financial package to make sure that, you know, the people of the enclaves were properly looked after once the exchange took place.
The next one is by Dr. Monica Nagar from Sydney. What are the reasons for the erosion of mutuality and its impact on Indo-Nepal relationship?
Well, I think that we have to be respectful as a country which has a constitution, and I've recently spoken in Parliament about following the principles of constitutional morality. We need to be respectful of the processes of constitution making in a neighboring state, even if we are not entirely happy with the outcome. And we ought not to be second guessing the makers of the constitution in Nepal. And I think it was very unfortunate that after, you know, a high-profile visit by the Prime Minister, Indo-Nepal relations went completely off the rails. And I think we have to take a good part of the responsibility for that having happened. Now, we can always have concern for people who have, you know, kinship ties with us in India, who happen to live in neighboring sovereign countries. But we cannot take that concern to the level of what looks like, you know, aggressive intervention, or what looks like a blockade which is actually undermining the livelihoods of people who live in a much smaller country, in this case a landlocked country. So I think we actually needed to be much more generous in our approach to Nepal. We appeared to be generous when that terrible earthquake shook Kathmandu and the country. But we need to be more understanding of the sensitivities of a smaller neighbor, and I hope that we'll be able to put Indo-Nepal relations on an even keel before long, despite the dip that took place in the latter half of 2014.
The next one is by Arjun Chawla. He's from the Delhi University. Given the resumption of composite dialogue between India and Pakistan, what scope do you see for multi-track diplomacy? Do you think that a multi-track approach can reduce the risk of derailment of talks in the future?
Well, there ought to be multiple tracks, but I think the official level talks will in some sense be the most important. The talks on terrorism between the national security advisors of the two countries, and the talks on, you know, all other subjects that are part of the comprehensive bilateral dialogue between the foreign secretaries of the two countries. But there has to be political leadership and political direction so that the Foreign Secretary feels empowered to reach certain types of agreements. Now, that doesn't mean that there may not be some other multiple tracks of engagement between the two countries. And let me say that I was not opposed to the idea that the NSA talks in Bangkok were kept secret until they actually happened. Sometimes it is necessary in diplomacy. Think about the biggest diplomatic breakthrough of the late 20th century, Kissinger's talks with China. They were completely shrouded in secrecy until the breakthrough happened. Sometimes you have to keep in addition to the official level talks. But what I would say, the back channel for too long doesn't work. And this is exactly what happened with the UPA, UPA 1. I think that the back channel talks had progressed extremely well with Sati Lamba being, the interlocutor on the Indian side. But I think it was kept in the back channel for too long. At some stage you have to come out, you have to build a constituency, you have to engage in public diplomacy. And even though it is often suggested that it was Musharraf's problems after Lal Masjid in 2008, which meant that that particular sort of, still say that, it was kept in the back channel for far too long. So yes, multiple tracks are important, but these official level talks at the Foreign Secretary level and also on the question of terrorism at the NSA level will in fact be extremely important, which can be supported with some back channel efforts and other tracks.
The last of this lot is by Manisha Sharma in Jaipur. Why should growing India-Afghanistan ties worry Pakistan?
Well, it does seem to worry Pakistan, or certainly certain elements within the Pakistan military. And that's because the Pakistani military had what I believe to be this completely flawed doctrine of achieving strategic depth in Afghanistan. And what that has resulted for Pakistan is basically bringing terrorism on itself, on its own urban centers, really almost ripping apart the social fabric of Pakistan. So I think there's also realization in most enlightened circles in Pakistan that this doctrine of strategic depth in Afghanistan for Pakistan's security hasn't really worked well for Pakistan. To be involved in Afghanistan means feel that, India deal with India on two fronts. That's their worry. My own view is that the legitimate or genuine security concerns of Pakistan can be allayed. I think that there can be a solution found in Afghanistan where India is actually playing quite a major role in development, in infrastructure building, and so forth. And one can actually take some measures to convey to Pakistan that there is no real security threat from that direction coming from India. So we have to think in terms of peace for all, insecurity for none. And I think, that can be achieved, and I hope that in the course of the comprehensive bilateral dialogue with Pakistan, any lingering concerns about Afghanistan can also be addressed.
Thank you very much.